Everybody. Today's talk will be on the appeal selection system in donor management. Some of you who've used Donman for a while, this may be a bit of a refresher course. Some who are new to it may learn a lot about how to run appeals, and I'll be talking a lot about the selection system. And I hope that by the end of it, even those who've used it before will pick up on things you didn't know before. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through some information about why we use selection files. And the reason we have a thing called a selection file is to separate finding who you want, which is the selection process, from doing things. And by doing things, I mean things like mail merging, mailing labels, listing those who are selected, specialty mailing house output. Now, when I wrote donor management about 25 years ago, I wasn't clever enough to separate these things out. And so the program that did mail merge, the program that did mailing labels, there were 4 of those programs, and they all had about 4 screens full of questions and things that lead you through the selection process. And eventually it dawned on me that that was a pretty dumb way of doing it, that I kept having to change 4 different programs. And so what I did was separate the idea of selecting who you wanted from the actual doing things. So now we have a selection file system where when you do the selection, it creates a simple selection file. And once you've got that selection file, you can then, from that selection file, do things like mailing labels, mail merge, emailing to the people in there, and I'll be covering many of those things today. So in terms of what is a selection file, in order to separate selecting from doing, we need to have some system to record who's been selected. Now, selection file for the donor system always ends in .apl. There's no heading, and they're just a list of donor numbers, for example, and that's an example of a selection file, and you can see there it's just 1, 2, 5, 24, 31. They are the donor numbers that have been selected. Now, the process selection can be done in many ways. Most of today will be spent going through the appeal selection program, which is Donman's most powerful selection system. It enables you to do many things that you couldn't do with a simple report writer, many things that would take a lot of programming, but Donman does it all for you, and very simply by you just filling in the boxes and saying what you want. But ultimately what it produces is a list of donors like you can see on that screen. Now, there are many ways of producing that, not just the donor selection program. How can we produce a selection file? Well, using Microsoft Word. If you just type in a list of donor numbers in a list like you saw on the page before and save it as a text file with APL on the end, you've created a selection file. There is the Type Your Own Selection File program on the Appeals menu, and I'll show you that in a minute. Then there is the full Donor Appeal Selection program, which is what we're covering today in detail. You can also produce a selection file from our visual report writer and our previous report writers by simply saving as a selection file the data. And the multi-find option on the donor screen, when you're finding people, there is an option there to say create a selection file too. So there are many, many ways of doing it. So I'm going to go into Donman now, and we're going to go into the appeals area. Now, to show you how simple it is to make a selection, I'm going to, on the appeals menu, there's an option called, let me just maximize this so it fills the screen, Type Your Own Selection File. So the simplest way of doing a selection file, other than typing it in Word, is by naming the selection file. So I'm going to call it My Test, and I'm going to enter some donor numbers, donor 3, donor 5, and you can see that the name and the address is validated. I can see who that is. So when I type the 5, I'll type 8. No, there is no donor 8. So I'll try 4, and there's a 4. So that's it. By going through one by one, I can just enter numbers, and that will create a selection file. I can also find those people using the multi-find option, like you can with the donor screen, and add that person in. So that's a selection file at its most simplest. And if I was to look and list that, you'd see a little file like the one I showed you on the screen before. Today we'll mainly be on the appeal selection, and that's this first program here, Create Donor Selection File. Now, why do we use this program? And the reason we use this program is because it'll do many things for you that would be very hard to do in any other way. You can, it's taking a while to load, I'm not really sure why, there we go. You can do things here that you could never do with a report writer, like, for example, asking for all the donors that have given between $100 and $200 between any two dates. Now, to do that, the program has to look at all the donations that each person's given between those dates and then see whether the total meets your criteria. Now, a simple report writer that looks at one record at a time couldn't do that, but this program will do it all for you very easily. Now, the program has been designed so that you don't have to go through all its pages because it has many options. Basically, almost anything that's in the donor and donation system can be accessed via this selection program, and you can select by it. And that's really hundreds of options, and the last thing you want to do is to have to go through every single one of the pages of it. So we have these tabs at the top of the screen so you can jump to the section you want once you're familiar with it. Now, because this is a training session and I'm going to be showing you all of the system, I'm actually going to go through every screen. But I want you to be clear that you don't have to do that. Once you know where you want to go, if all you want to do is select by a code, you'll go there. Now, the first thing I'm going to do today is run a very simple selection just to show you how easy it is, and then I'll go through a more detailed one. So the first thing you have to do is you have to enter the information on this first page. It's the only page that you can't jump to another tab from, because the first thing it wants to know is what do you want to call the selection file. So the selection file, which is the list of donor numbers we talked about, that little list of numbers, what are we going to call it? So I'm going to call it members. Now, in the old days, this could only have been upper and lower, but now it can be, you can have long things, you can have upper and lower, long strings, you can have anything you want as a name. So I'm just going to call it members. And do you want to use the save selection format? No, you can, in fact, once you've created one of these selections, you can save them, and we'll do that later. But I'm just going to continue on to the next screen. Now, once I'm on this screen, I can simply jump to where I want to go. Now, I will cover all of this in detail with you, but I just simply want to show you a quick selection. So I'm going to go to flags, and I'm going to say members must be a member, and I'm going to go to finish and select. So now I'm running that simple selection, and that's pulled out my 121 members. And it will, in fact, in a second bring up on the screen. I apologise, this is taking a bit longer, and I'm not really sure why. There we are. It's bringing up what I've selected by, and we know that all I selected by was members equal yes. The system, all the appeal programs do default to excluding people coded no mail or with a date of death. If you don't want that, you can, in fact, override that. But I've got 121 records selected. Now, from that list of members, I can now, for example, create something like mailing labels or a merge file. Now, that's a very simple selection. So now I'm going to go in and show you the various things I can do with this program. So I'm going to call this, oops, sorry, not that one. There is an advanced option which I'll cover later, which is to do multiple selections. So I'm now going to just say, I don't want to run several selections in one go, and I will cover that later. But otherwise, what do you want to call this selection file? So I'm going to call this my text selection again. Okay, and it's saying it already exists, so I'm going to override it. And now I'm going to continue over. Now, the first page is where you can make a selection by a dollar total within a period of time. And this is a very powerful selection. So that if I was to enter $200, and if I put a top value in, I'm saying I don't want anyone who's given more than 1,000. But if I don't put anything there, I'm saying anyone who's given between $200 and above. I don't care how much, I'm saying they must have given $200. Now, I can enter an amount for the number of donations, but I'm not going to. I'm going to put the dates in. 1st of the 1st, 2008, or let's say 2009, and we'll say today. So what I'm saying here is I want to get donors, only those donors who've given a total of $200 from 2009 till today. So these are my reasonably current donors who've given a significant amount of money. So if somebody has given a total of $100 in that period, they'll be excluded. They've given a total of 200, 210, 1,000, 10,000, they'll be in. Now you can see the value in that. If I was to try and do that manually, how much work that would be. But what Donman's going to do is going to look at every donor. It's going to add up all that donor's donations between the 1st 2009 and today, and then see what the total is. And if that person's total is over $200, it's going to be in there, and if the total's not above $200, it's going to be excluded. So it's a powerful option. Now, the other thing you can do with that is that you can also, what we call filter. You can exclude or select only certain campaigns for that particular total. So, for example, I might want all the people who've given $200 in the last 2 years, but I may want to exclude some. I might want to say by campaign, and this lets me do up to 40 different options. So I might say I want to exclude all. I can also exclude all December 2011. You can see what I'm getting to here. What I'm saying is, look, people who buy ball tickets might have easily spent more than $200, but that really doesn't count as a donation. We want people who have actually given us $200 or more. Now, instead of having to list every ball there is, what I can do is get rid of that and type ball star. And when I do that, it says down the bottom wildcard search. So what we're saying is that any donation to a campaign that starts with ball should not be counted. Now, I want to be really careful and make sure you understand me when I say this. We're not excluding someone because they gave to the ball. If someone has given us $200 in donations without counting ball, they will still be in this selection. All we're saying is that when you go and add up the amount they've given since 2009, don't count balls. And I might also say don't count memberships. And I might also nominate some other campaigns, the auto test and the that one. So that's a way of filtering out. Now, instead of that, that's one option which is very powerful. Instead of doing that, we can filter in. We can say only include donations in the above by campaign or by campaign group. Now, where that would be useful would be if we wanted to get everyone who'd given $200, but we wanted it to be $200 for the last 3 annual appeals. So what we want to do is they must be from those annual appeals. We don't want it from anything else. Or it might be bequest money, it might be membership money, it could be for events, it might be all the people who have spent more than $200 on events. It doesn't matter. So you can select, just as I could by exclusion, I can select the campaigns you want to filter in. So that's a way in which I can control that $200 that I've put in there. So I think you can see there are many uses for that. And when we go to the next screen, which we call History and Mail, this is more about excluding and selecting people by campaigns, not about the total money. It's about saying, look, if a person's given to this campaign, I want them, or if a person hasn't given to this campaign, I want them, etc., etc. So the first option, very simple. You can see this is, it's really English-like questions. Donors must have a last donation date between blah, blah, and blah, blah. So if I was to say their last donation was between 1st of the 1st, 1900 and 1st of the 1st, 2011, what I would be doing in that would be a lapsed donor selection, because I'm saying their last donation date must have been that before 1st of the 1st, 2011. In other words, they haven't given all of 2011 and for this much of 2012. So they've been a year and a quarter, they haven't made a donation. Now, what dates you decide someone's lapsed by is up to you, and I think I'm being probably a bit tough there on just a year. You might consider 2 years as lapsed. So now you may ask, why did I put a starting date? Donors must have a last donation date between. The reason I've done that is because if a person hasn't given anything and has no donations, then in a way their last date was before the 1st of the 1st, 2011, because 0 is before the 1st of the 1st. But by saying they must have given since 1st of the 1st, 1900, I'm ensuring the person's at least given at some point in time. So that's one option that's in there. Now the next option is donors must have a first donation date between 1st of the 1st, 2011. So if I do that and I'll say, and today, what I'm saying, or I might even say 31st of the 12th, 11. So what I'm saying here is I want every donor that was acquired last year. So I'm looking for new donors. I want to know who are the people that we got who made their first donation last year. I'm deleting some of these because I want to get something out at the end. Donors must have a high donation amount between. Look, sometimes this option is actually very useful in conjunction with the first screen. Because in the first screen, I was saying I wanted people that have given at least $200. But let's suppose the particular appeal we're running, we really want to get $50 from someone. So we might say the people we think are good candidates are people that have given over $200. But if those people who have given $200 have never given a donation of more than $10, we might think, gee, you know, maybe over the 2 years they've given $200, but we're really never going to get what we want for this appeal. So we might put in and say, yes, they must have given at least one donation of $50 and above somewhere along the way. Now, the other option thing that happens here too, sometimes, I know you know in those appeal letters we send out that say at the bottom, yes, I would like to give, and I would like to give $10, $50, $100, $200. Or in some cases it might say $500, $1,000, $10,000, $20,000. Now, Donman has, I won't be covering today, but does have a facility of creating those suggested amounts. Now, of course, you can have those suggested amounts just printed on your appeal letters, but that would mean everybody gets the same suggested amount. So that if I'm the head of BHP, I'm going to get an appeal letter that suggests 10, 20, 30, 40, and that would be really silly. My last donation was $10,000. So it's nice to tailor that. But if we are using that and we are looking at breaking people down by their last donation, we may still want to say, yes, we want them to have given $200, but we want to make sure their last donation was at least $20 or at least $30 or something. So that's an option there. Now, the next option is selecting by campaigns or by campaign groups. So if I select by campaign, I can say I want anybody who's given to that one or Bull December 2011 or BACQ, and I can just type them in too, and I can call member or just test member. Okay, so when we do this kind of selection, what we're saying is that we want people that have given to just those campaigns. I'm not sure why it's popping up postcode there. So we're saying we want to select by a particular campaign, and we want to make sure that people have given to one of those campaigns. Now, I say one because that's the default. And this is a new thing in the last year or so we put into Donman. Down the bottom you can see it says must have given to between 1 and above of the campaigns. So we're saying we want to make sure that every donor that we select has given to one of these. But we do have a very powerful option in there. If we come down here, will be fixed. But basically what you can do is say they must have given between a certain number and another number. So that, for example, if you want to make sure they've given to 3 of those appeals or between 3 and 4, that's a very powerful option. You can say, well, I want people that have given to at least 2 out of the 3 and last 3 annual appeals. So it's quite a powerful option. And I can also exclude by campaign or campaign group. You can see that it defaults to exclude donors with mail code no mail or with a no mail date after today. That automatically has a yes in there, and exclude donors with a date of death. And I think that's for obvious reasons. You can see why we've done that. Now, if you don't want that, let's suppose you're running this selection, not because you're actually running an appeal and you want to write to people or email them or send it off to a mailing house. If you're doing this because you're just statistically trying to find a list of people and you're just trying to find out how many people meet a certain criteria, then you might forget and say yes to the date of death and death to no mail code, because those people really have given, and what their mail code is and whether they've died since then doesn't really concern us if we're just looking at statistics. Now we can select by donor mail code. So if I'm going to select by mail code, I'm going to select all the people that have coded all mail or appeals only, or now let's suppose this was the newsletter mailing, I could pick newsletter. So these are all the people by general mailing. Now you can see on that screen there's no option for saying how many. The reason is that a person only has one mail code. Now we have mail list codes which are different, which are more specific little mailing lists. A person can have many mailing lists, so we do have the option there. But for the general broad mail code, all mail, appeal, newsletter once a year, there is only one, so a person can only have one. But I can put as many up there as I want. But what I'm saying is that for someone to be selected in this selection for this appeal, they must have a mail code of all or appeal or news. If they don't have one of those mail codes, they will be excluded. So you can see what we're doing is we're building up a selection where we keep adding and adding and adding, and the end result of people, only the people who meet all the criteria. So now we've done mailing code, but now we have mailing list. So I can say I want people that are on the annual report or the club, in fact all of our mailing lists, newsletter. And I do have the option here, and it's doing the postcode thing again. There must be some systematic bug in this program that has crept in that I have no idea of, and what that should be doing, it's probably some very simple little thing, but that's stopping me getting into that bit down the bottom which says how many they must have given to. It's really annoying, but there's not much I can do about it now. Okay, you can exclude by mailing list. That was selecting by mailing list. I can exclude. I can say anybody that's given to the annual report, I want to be excluded, because maybe I'm going to do them separately. Select by last campaign mailed to. Now that is a very good option, because let's suppose we've done a selection and we've created a campaign, and the campaign was called the newsletter May 2011, May 2012 campaign. Now in July, we might want to go back to the same people. Actually, you probably wouldn't do that for a newsletter appeal, but let's suppose it was a building appeal. We've been writing to people for the smaller donors for our building appeal, and we've written to them and said, look, we'd really like you to contribute towards some major thing we're doing. Now, 2 months later, we want to write back to those people, but we only want to write back to the ones who haven't given and say, look, we're really close to our target. You know, we've got 10,000 out of the 20,000 we wanted, or 100,000 out of the 150,000, or whatever it is. Would you reconsider? So what we can do is we can exclude by campaigns given to. So we could say exclude anyone that gave the building appeal, but then we can select by last campaign mail to. So here we select the building appeal. And that way, I'm not actually going to do it this time, that way we will get the people who we mail to but who haven't given. Now the other option here is number of mails since last donation. Now I don't know whether everybody knows that, but it's a useful thing Donman does, that every time you do a mailing, and if you use the update mail history program on the appeals program, which will take the selection file we're doing now and actually trigger for each person a little note to say, yes, they were given this mailing. If you do that, we increase the number of times they've mailed. So for every donor, you can see on the donor record on screen too how many times they've mailed. Every time they make a donation, we clear that out. So the number of times mailed is always the number of times since their last donation, which means that you can very powerfully do that if you feel that you may have a lot of deadwood on your file, people that have been mailed umpteen times. And I personally have done data conversions for people from other systems where there have been people that have been mailed, I mean, they didn't have that information on their system on a screen where they could see it. When I read it and processed it, I discovered they had people that had been mailed 20 or 30 times since their last donation. Now that's a huge amount. We're totally wasted. So at some point, how often I mail them, I might even think of archiving them. Now we can also look at the total number of mails. So we've got the number of mails since last donation and the total mails. Also things you can select by. Now we've now moved to the next screen, which is called code. So if you just simply want to do a selection of by donor type, you can simply jump to this code. So from the first setup screen, I could jump to codes, and there I am. So if I go to donor type, for example, I want to select by donor type, and I want I want corporate donors and individuals and school, no, test, there is school, SCH, okay, school. So these are all the various people I want to mail to. Anybody else will be excluded. Now you can also exclude by donor type, so it's your choice to select or exclude by donor type. Do you want to select by extra codes? I can select by the extra codes that we have on the system. Up to each person can have up to 8 extra codes. So I want board members excluded because I'm going to mail to them separately, and committee members excluded because I'm going to mail to them separately. And again, the postcode thing, but you can select by the total number that you want to select by. And we can exclude by extra codes. Now the next couple of things correspond to what's called user fields. If you look at your donor screen, most of you, I hope, will be aware that there are some areas in Donman you can customize. On the donor screen, we have what we call the aux code, user code 1, user code 2, and over the page on the second screen, user code 3. These are fields where you can not only create your own codes, but you can actually change what it says on the screen. So I've left the aux code saying aux code, so saying do you want to select by aux code, and I've changed user code 1 to M reason, which is mailing reason, and I'm guessing the mailing reason I set up for someone to say why they've coded no mail. So you can select by mailing reason, by user code 2, user code 3, and again, if you've renamed user code 2 and 3 for a special purpose, it might be campus code, it might be patient category, that's what it will say on the screen. And then we can select by member types, by gifting kind codes, by refer to codes, occupation codes. Now we have male occupation and female codes so that if you do have a joint record, a Mr. and Mrs. Smith record, you can have a male and a female occupation code. And then we have involvement codes, which are the little involvement screen. And you can also say, have a date. So if I wanted to say involvement, select by involvement codes, I could select all those that were an IHC collector. And I could say between 1st of the 1st, 2009 and today. So in other words, I want people that were a collector in that period of time. Now, I'm not going to get anybody out of this if I do that, so I'm going to say no. Now, the next screen is called Postal and Other, and this is which lets you select by anything to do with post, country, region. So this is, do you want to select by postcode or pre-sort code? I can select by bulk mail code, postcode to bulk mail code, postcode. That used to be a really good way of selecting, but unfortunately, since Australian Post mucked up the postcode system, so you really can't be confident that things like New South Wales is 2,000 to 2,999 and Victoria is 3,000 to 3,999. So that we now tend to go to selecting by particular postcode, so you can in fact select just by individual postcodes. I'm going to say no, but both options are available to you. You can select by Australian state, so if I just said I just want Victoria, I could pick out Victoria. And then country code too, so if you wanted overseas addresses. Do you want to exclude by country code? So I might want to exclude all my overseas addresses if I wanted to, but I can do that on another screen too, more simply. Donors with DPID. DPID is for barcode. I can select or exclude barcode. I can select by donor number. So for whatever reason, if I wanted to create a list or a selection file, but only from the first 100 donors, then I might do one for the next 100 donors. It might be a way of doing a testing file, although we can do that in other ways too. We've got age from and to, which again would be only useful to you if you know you had dates of birth. Acquisition date, profile code. And profile code I won't spend a lot of time on today. I have covered that in other venues. If you've allocated RFM codes for donors, which is their recency, frequency, monetary value, and that appears on screen too, you can select by that. Okay, we're getting down near the end. We're now on flags. So these are the simple flags in memory givers, exclude or must be, bequest prospect. So if I just wanted bequest prospect, I could say N for bequest prospect, and I would only get bequest prospects. If I put an E in there, it's excluding request prospects from the system. And the same with pledge donors, Dex's VIP donors. And that first little quick selection I did, if you remember, was members, and I put an M into the member flag to say must be a member. If I want to exclude members, I would have excluded them. And then we have all the other flags. Now, a really important one, we often get asked, how can we do a mail merge to email? Okay, now we've covered in some of the user groups, and I think in the Gary and I did the doing mail merging with Donman, we covered emailing and we showed how to use PDF Machine to do mail merge with attachments for the 4 donation receipts. Now, if you're doing an appeal letter, it's not as critical, the PDF thing, because really, if somebody has a copy of your appeal letter as a Word document, it doesn't really matter. So it's really up to you how you want to do that. But what you want is to know who has email addresses and who hasn't. So what I could do is very easily create this selection, save it as a saved selection, and then run it once with email address must be and once with email exclude. So my email must be will be all the people like it. Then when I do the mail merge, I say merge to email, and the ones with exclude are the ones where I do a normal manual merge and send them out either through a mail house or through paper in my own office. Overseas addresses, I can exclude overseas addresses and handle them separately. Okay, now the second last screen is all about Code Pool. Now Code Pool is the system that lets you create your own little system within Donman. So you create your own master code, subcode. I have examples here of an allergy code. So I've got allergy, and do you want to select by allergy? If I select by allergy, I can select health food, homeopathy, bumblebees, etc., etc. In my postcode thing. So these are selecting by code pool, or down the bottom exclude by code pool code. You can see I can select on up to 5 different master code pools and exclude up to 5 code pools. So if you've created a code pool system and all you want to do is a selection by code pools, you can use this system to do it. And then finally, selection finalize. First thing says, do you want a duplicated mail? Now that's including those with no and duplicated mail. That's a system we've set up so that if you want to do a householder appeal, you can have, if you have a record for the husband and the wife that are 2 separate records, on the husband or the wife's record you might say include in the duplicated mail, and the other one you might say no. So if you want a duplicated mail, they'll both get a letter, they'll both be selected, but if you say I don't want a duplicated mail, then only the one with yes will get selected. So that's a way of just doing a householder letter if you need to do that. So now, do you want to save these choices to a new selection format? So I'm going to say yes, I'm going to call it Andrew. So the Andrew format is just what we've done today. I'm going to give a description and use yes at the webinar. Okay. Now, that's a saved report format. So at any point I can go into it, and when I click on this little button, I can see Andrew's test for the webinar. So that's there, and I can view that if I want to. And I can always come back to it, Andrew's test for the webinar, and go to view. And when the viewer kicks in, for some reason when I'm running this webinar, some of the things are slow on my machine. There we go. It's really taking its time. There we are. So it's telling me all the things I've selected on today. You can see I've done a total greater than equal $200 with donations given on or after 1st 2009, selected by those campaign codes, etc., etc. So given how many things I've selected, it is probably pretty unlikely I'm going to get anybody. So I'm going to now run the report. Now my choice is to output it in Australia Post pre-sort or alphabetical or some other order that I choose. So I'll do it in pre-sort code order. And when it runs, it tells you pretty quickly how many it's selected. And as I say, because I've made so many silly selections, I'm sure I'll see at the end 0 people selected. Yes, 0 selected. But it tells you, you get an indication of how long it's going to take. So that's the simple appeal selection system and all the various things you can do there. And I will go on and show you what I can do with it now. I'll show you some examples of using it. So first of all, mail merge. So create mail merge data file, which is the thing we're going to most use, which is we want to actually create a mail merge for the people selected. Now we've got this selection file. Okay, for now. Okay, what's the name of your selection file? Now, I won't use the Andrew one because we know that there was no one in there, but I will use one of the ones I've got here. Here's one called RFN. It's got 269 in there. Well, that's the length. No, it's 58 people. Okay, I've got 58 in there. So I've told it what selection file I want, and it's going to create a merge file. Now, I'm not going to go through all the various options here because that's not the purpose of today, but I will go and now, what I will show you is that when you create this merge file, it gives you a list of what the fields are that will be output in the merge file for you to use in mail merging. And you can see those little dotted lines. The dotted lines mean that everything from above is always put there by our program. Anything between the dotted lines, you've chosen to add. So we've chosen email as a nice thing to have. But you can go down here from the donor file and pick some other field. Like if we picked, say, sex. So that way, in the mail merge, we could have a bit of selective text which said that if sex equals male, put this bit of text. If it's female, put another bit of text. So we continue onward, and we've now done the two things I mentioned at the start, that we are going to separate selection from working. So we've done our selection, and now we're doing working. So the working is creating the mail merge file, and here is the mail merge file for the first person. We're now able to go mailing, go to finish and merge, edit individual documents, and produce the mail merge for those 69 people. There we are. So we now have all those letters duplicated for all those people. Now, it's exactly the same for when I go and do mailing labels, print mailing labels, a listing, short summary of donor information. If I do short summary, I hope your domain systems don't take this long to write. I know they don't, and mine don't either. Okay, so selection file, we pick a selection file, and we'll say it's reactive, whatever it is, and print preview, and now we have 62 people listed in this listing. Now those people were listed, they started off, somebody's run a selection file like I've shown you today, and from that selection file we have a list of the people who were selected. So that is the difference between selecting and acting. Now I'm going to show you one more thing, which is a more advanced option for selection. The very first question I skipped over from the appeal selection program was, do you want to run several selections in one go? Now, many of you will never need to use this. Most of you will just run a selection and that's the end of it. But there are cases where what you want to do is actually more complicated even than what our normal selection system will do. So you might say, well, look, really, I've got all my board members and I've got them as a standard selection file. And now I've got another selection. And that selection are people I generally want to mail to. And I've got a third one. But they're not really linked together. But what I'd like to do is to run all three. But what I want to do is make sure that anybody picked in the first group is not picked in the second or third. Anyone that's picked in the second is not picked in the third. So the program is actually deduping as it goes by donor number. So that's where, if you say you want to run several selections in one go. So if I say yes, it says what's the name of the text file that contains a list of appeal formats. Now, this text file is just simply a text file that names the report format. Now, I created a report format called Andrew, and Andrew didn't really have much in there, but Andrew is a report format. So I've got one called My Group, and My Group has, I'll show you what's in My Group. Kicks in. Anyway, it will have several selection files. There we are, mother, and Mother2 report formats. The idea being that I can then, or I can create my own. So I can, instead of doing it like this, I can press F8 to build a list. So I press F8 and it shows me all my selection formats. So I'm going to do Andrew's test at the webinar. Oops. That's number 1. And I'm going to do Christmas, number 2, and Lapse, number 3. And 15 to save. No, hang on. Oh, I've got to give it a name. Test. Okay, now when I run the test thing, it says, do you want to set the selection flag to yes for those selected and automatically ignore them in further selections? Now that's the main benefit of using this system. The selection flag is just a field in the donor screen in the donor file called the selection flag. It's not something you would normally use. But if you say yes to this, which I'm going to do, what it will do is the first time it runs through the selection program, it will actually look at every single donor on your donor file and mark everyone as no, except for the people picked in the first one. So then the only people with a yes are the people picked in the first selection file. It'll then run the next 2 selections, and anyone that's already been picked in the first one will be excluded in the second. And so you will end up with 3 selection files that are automatically deduced. It says, do you want the first selection file to clear the selection file from unselected records? And normally we'd say yes, we want to clear it out. Do you want to write all the records into the lookup database? That's an option. I won't do that now. Do you want to create selection file through, and I'm going to say actions. It'll run the first one. It'll run the second one. So we've got 10 selected in the second one. Or maybe that was the 3 because there was no one in the first one. And eventually it will pop on the screen and we'll see the results. Okay, so we got the first one, we got none. Second one we got none. The third one we got 10. So none were rejected because they've been previously selected because this was a poor selection file. But you can see what I'm doing. Had 50 been selected under Andrew, maybe 10 would have been rejected by buyers because they've already been selected in Andrew. So this is the way that you can actually create multiple selections and run them and have them deduced. Now I'm going to show you one more thing today because I'm probably running out of time. I'm going to show you creating a selection file in another way because sometimes people want to do something which is a little different than from the appeal selection program. Like it might be, I want everybody whose surname is Smith. Now clearly that's not in the selection program, but we can go into the reports menu and into reporter and visual reporter. Now if we go to visual reporter, now I'm going to do a pretty silly report and I'm going to I'm going to run a report on the donor file. I'm going to order it in surnames, and my criteria is going to be surname starts with S, or let's say ST. Okay. And now I can pick whatever fields I want. So let me just go down here to, just to prove that it's worked. I'll put out donor number and surname. So I go to preview and there are my names start with ST. But what I want to show you is you go to the file option, there's an option, save report data as selection file. So I'm going to call this ST names. Now, the beauty of that is I've now created a selection file using the appeal selection program. So I've done what our appeal program does using the reporter. So it's another method of creating a selection file. Having created that selection file, I can do all those other things. I can do the mailing labels and the merge and the email, and I can also use it in various statistical reports. So for example, if I go back to the appeal program now, appeals area, and go to print mailing labels, should take up yoga waiting for this. Okay, what's on your selection file? It was ST names. and there are 20 of them. So I'll do it to screen. I'm just going to pick 2 across, just take all the defaults. And there we go. So I've created a selection file using Visual Reporter, and I've produced mailing labels for them. And so all the power of Visual Reporter can also be brought to bear to do a selection file as well as the appeal selection file. That pretty well brings me to the end of what I had prepared for today, and I'll now go back to Marla and we can have questions. Marla?
First question was, yes, hello.
Hello, sorry.
Thanks, Andrew.
Good, I'm glad I wasn't talking to the wall.
Just takes me a minute to unmute. First question was from Elizabeth, and it was from earlier in the session, in fact, right near the beginning. It was, how do you include the total amount given by a donor on the final data report? I find it only gives the last donation.
Today what I've been looking at is how to do selections, not about how to actually report output. So I'm not really sure what she means by the final data output. You can certainly select by how much someone's given, but I've just been showing how to select. If you want to show how much someone's given, there are ways, but again, I'm not sure which area she means. But if we go back to the appeal system, if we go to the short summary of donor information, my selection file, I'll do the ST list one, ST names. Instead of printing each donor's donation total, do you want to print a total for each donor based on the donation total within a period of time? I can say yes, and I can say between 1st of the 1st, 2008 and today, and I can exclude and select, but I'm not going to. Print and print preview. So now we have a listing which is going to give us the donation total for the period, a number of donations given in that period. I'm not sure whether that helps. Maybe I've misunderstood. Perhaps you could get clarification if that's what was wanted.
Yeah, certainly, Elizabeth. If you'd like to further clarification, please let us know on the question pane. And certainly, if anyone else has any questions, please post them on the question pane on your control panel on the right-hand side of your viewer. So there was more of a suggestion rather than a question was from Ruth. Was will we have a separate session to be held on going in depth into the Visual Reporter? That might be a suggestion, Andrew.
I think that we are thinking of doing that. In fact, we've actually run a couple of training courses on Visual Reporter, and obviously a webinar is not as good as that because we can't actually sit with you and watch you doing it. But I think that that is very likely in the near future. It's an excellent suggestion, and we are actually thinking about it.
There's no more questions posted at the moment, so if anyone does have any questions, we're here for another. Well, we're scheduled to stay until 3:30, so if you do have any questions, we're more than happy to take them, and that's the idea of today's webcast, is to answer any questions you have following the training portion of it. So please feel free to ask any questions. We'll stay on the line for a little bit longer.
Or if anybody wants me to cover something which is part of the appeal system in more detail, if somebody did want me to cover, bulk selections or deduping selections or something like that, and we could always do that as well.
Okay. Question from Cindy. How do you add individual donors to a selection file?
Okay, Cindy, that's a really good question. I'll take you back to what I said at the start, that a selection file is just a list of numbers. So, remember I said that's what a selection file is, just a list of donor numbers. So that if you know that you want to add just one particular donor, you could obviously edit it in a word processor. There is another option. I think that you'll be able to do this. If you go into type your own selection file, I'm not sure whether this works or not. I'm just going to try this. Yes, it does. Okay. So on type your own selection file, let's suppose we have a selection file called test. and we want to add 2 more names to it. And when you go in and say, I want to call the selection file test and type your own selection file, it says this selection file exists. Overwrite, append, skip. So we've got the append option. So if I choose the append option, then anything I now type will be appended to that selection file. So I'm going to type 89. Well, now I'll use multi-signed, and I'll find a donor. Everything didn't take 4 hours to run. Okay, so I'm going to pick Heather Smith, who's 178, and I'm just going to enter to save it, and that's it, and escape. That's it. I've now added Heather Smith to that selection file. And like I said, another way I could have done it would be just simply edit it in Word. As long as I saved it back in the same format, I could type the number in on the new line. But that type your own selection file method is a really good one where you want to add a couple, and it does give you the extra advantage of validating it so you can see when you type the number in, or you can find an actual donor and add them. So I hope that answers it, Cindy.
Thanks, Andrew. A couple more questions have been posted now. One from Heather. When you selected the 3 separate groups at the end, what instance is this good for? And sorry, where was this again?
Okay. The idea is that, look, you can go through the selection system and try and do all the selecting, excluding you want. Sometimes you get a bit lost, like your head spins and you think, now how am I going to do that? And I want these people, but I don't want this, and I want this, and I don't want that. And you can get to a situation where you get very confused and you're not really sure what it is you want, or whether it's going to work because it gets too complex. Sometimes it's really nice to be able to break it up and say, look, all I know is I want a group of people that are board members that are current board members. Like, that's it. That's my priority. I want current board members. Now, I don't want to think about board members. I want all the people who've given more than $100 and have done this and done that. And then I've got a third group, and that's the people that have given the last 3 years. So rather than try and weed them out and try and exclude everything, by running the 3 together and saying exclude anybody who's been in the first one, in the second one, and the third one, I know that I'm going to get 3 clean selection files. The first selection file will be the priority one. It'll be all my board members. The second one will be my new criteria, but it will automatically exclude anybody picked the first time. So board members will just be excluded. Now, I could have done that one simply with the appeal program, but it's a nice way of being able to do fairly complicated things and guaranteeing there are no duplicates.
Okay, and a question from Lauren. Can you show us how to dedupe selection files?
Okay, all right. Now that will take a little while, but I'll do that. Now there's a program called Lookup Selections. Now this menu is where you do it. And it's called Generate Selection Lookup, View Selected Records, and Make New Selections. So these 3 things are what you use to deduce, and the Edit Donors is just if you want to actually change a donor record via the lookup. So the first thing is that we're creating, it's like we're creating a view of the donor file of just those people in a particular selection. So when I go into Generate Selection Lookup, it says what selection file do you want to use? And I'm going to use the ST names. And the first question, it says how many are there, and it tells me there's 20. Then it says, do you want to clear the lookup file first so that the only names in it are from the selection file above? Now, when you embark on a new deduping, you would always say yes. Yes, I want to clear it so that all that's in there are the ST names people. So I run that, and off it goes, and I've got my 20 names. Now, if I want to look at those, I go to View Selected Records, and we have a program that looks suspiciously like the donor program, because it is the donor program, but a special version of the donor program, which only shows people that are in the lookup database. Okay, so as I scroll through them, you can see that where normally reason for archive would appear in the archive file, it says cell now for selection file, and it tells me these are people from ST name. So you'll notice when I clear the file and start again, it doesn't go to donor 1, it went to 26. So this is only showing me the people that are in ST names. Now, if I then decide I want to read another selection file in and deduce them, I can go to Generate Selection Lookup again, and this time I'll pick a different one. I'll pick Exclude, whatever that one is, and it says there are 11 of them, and it says, do you want to clear the lookup for? And I'll say, no, I don't want to clear it because I'm going to add them in. Now it says you've got two options, read it in or just look at it to dedupe. Now if you read it in, you'll end up with a combined selection file of all the stooges and all the ST names, but you'll get the option of getting rid of the duplicates. So you're creating one amalgamated selection file. On the other hand, if you simply want to dedupe them, I can say just dedupe, and I can create a new selection file for the dedupe cell onto, and we'll call it dedupe. And it's found some. Donor 165 with in selection files, ST names and stooge. You have two choices now. Delete any records and lookup file that are found in a new selection file, or skip any duplicates, so the lookup file has only one record for each donor. So you've got the choices, either delete the duplicates or skip. I'm going to skip. So I tend to skip. So now when I go to View Selected Records, you'll see this ST names. Oh, sorry, yeah, I didn't amalgamate them, right? I probably should have done amalgamated. So let me go to Generate Selection Lookup, and I'll do stooge, and I'll say, I'll read them in. Skip the duplicates, so I'll get the amalgamated files. It looks like there's one different. View Selected Records. Oh, yes. Okay, there's one for stooge. Right, so basically what I've done is I've read in and created a selection file that contains both selections but removed any duplicates. Now, that option of creating a selection file of those that were duplicates is there, so I can always find out who the duplicates are. But if I use the other option of skipping, I can then create a situation where I have two selection files that are deduped. We could probably look, can I say that we intend covering this? The next workshop seminar like this is going to be on deduping with Donman. So we're going to cover deduping text files, deduping within the donor system, and selection deduping, which is this bit I've just shown you quickly. So there'll be a lot more detail in that next webinar on how to do that. So that's a bit of a brief look at it, and certainly we can help you on the phone if you want to do that. But there are so many options there, it really helps if we know exactly what it is you're trying to do.
Andrew, just a couple of more questions there. One from Sarah. Is there an easy way to select people in the database who have never donated?
I'm glad you asked that question, because actually one of Shari said to me today, do the option of how to select people who've never donated. Okay, there are two ways of doing it. Obviously, I'm going to show the appeal selection program wasn't really designed for it, so I'm going to show you a workaround. Obviously, if you're using Visual Reporter, it's very easy. If I'm using Visual Reporter to do my selection file, I would simply go to the donor file, and my criteria would be either donation count, either donation count or donation total equals 0. So donation count equals 0, and let's have the donor number. So they're all the people who have given nothing, right? So that's an easy way. Using the appeal selection program, if you need to combine that criteria with other things, you can do it. But I'll tell you why it's a little trickier, and that's because when it asks you things like loads, until I started this webinar, this system was working as fast as it normally does, and I've got no idea why it's doing it. So I'm going to create a selection file called cell 1. Oh, well, no, let me call it no money. Okay, it's asking for donation total. Now the problem is that if we type 0, it's not taking the 0. 0 means I'm not interested and it skips. So that's really not, you can't do it in that situation. But what you can do is donors must have a last donation between, and what you do is you say nothing and the first 1900. So, I mean, that's on the assumption that no one is ever given as early as 1900. That will pick only people who've never given, because anyone who's given will have a donation date after 1900. So that's a little fudge in the appeal selection program to get around it. At some point we may just build a little question in just to do that one for you. And I think since it seems to be really popular and lots of people have asked for it, I think we should probably put that on our list of things to do. And hopefully in the next update or two that will be on there. But for the time being, that's just a way of getting around it. And I guess you could do the same whether it was last donation or first donation date or high amounts. You could do this in lots of ways, but I mean the dates is the best way to do it. By putting in a ridiculous date as the most recent date, that guarantees you only get people that have never given. Okay, so that's 2 ways of doing it.
Okay, Andrew, and one more question from Colleen. On the history and mail screen, if I want to mail to donors who did not respond to the last mail campaign, what is the process?
Process, I did mention it, but I'll go over that. That's a good question, excellent question. So what we're going to do is, let's suppose that we're going to exclude by campaigns given to. So we go to exclude by campaign, and we pick the campaign that we're interested in, which is CACQ, or more than one if we want to. And then we go to select by last campaign mailed to, and we take CACQ. So now what I'm saying is I want anybody that didn't give to campaign CACQ, but we mailed CACQ to. And that just those 2 simple things gives me what I want. The people who haven't given to that campaign, but I know I mailed to them. So I can now go back and ask them again. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. Colleen says thank you.
You're welcome,
Colleen. I'm not sure if this might have already been covered as well from Rhonda. How do you find a selection file from multi-find?
Oh, no, we didn't do that. I just mentioned it. Okay. Let me do that. That's a good one. Okay, so I go to donor entry. Look, this is not how you do selection. So I'm saying this is a very special purpose type thing. It's not that often you would actually find this useful, but it is still in there. So for example, okay, so I go to multi-find, and I'll say I want anybody whose postcode is 3000 and well, let's just do 3,000. Let's do that. No, that wasn't a very good one. 2,000. Okay, so I've got 2 people that meet the criteria. So I've got my criteria. Then it's simply a matter of using the Create Selection File button. What do you want to call this? We'll call it 2000 postcode. Done. So there we are. So whatever criteria I can put in there, and remember there is this extra search field, so you can use any other criteria as well as what's on the screen. Once I've got the list on the screen, if I like that list, I can always create a selection file.
Okay, Andrew, that basically concludes all the questions we've had. I think we've covered a fair bit. Was there anything else you wanted to just quickly cover there, Andrew, or finish it up?
No, I just keep in lookout for that next webinar in about a month or 2, and we'll do the deducing, which I think will be a really good one. I'll try and get a few of the staff involved in that one, because there's a lot of material to be covered there. We'll do the selection deducing and that one as well. But thank you all for coming.
Yeah, and just going on what Andrew said, we are running the webcast each month, and the next one is scheduled for Wednesday the 23rd of May at 2 o'clock, so look for in your inbox for further details on that shortly. And we will be posting all recordings of the webcast to our website, and we will include some links in our monthly newsletter as well to those. So currently we've got the last 2 webcasts up on the website, I believe, so please have a look there and check out last week's newsletter as well, had those details. So thank you again for joining us today. We hope you learned a lot. If you do have further questions, you can contact us on the email at info@donman.net.au or give us a call, of course. So this concludes our webcast today. Thank you again for joining us. Goodbye.